Well, the latest hurricane in the United States was definitely a terrible natural disaster. I hope everyone that was hit by that is doing well, is going to come out all right out of it. But it has some political implications that might also explain the government's response, which a lot of people are dissatisfied with. You can see that it has been politicized to the extreme, and I have an idea as to why if we listen to what Democrat uh, David Axelrod has to say.
Here's my question about North Carolina. You had these killer storms, which, by the way, was a third big story this week.
Yes, another
storms. And there's a lot of displacement in western North Carolina. Now, Asheville is a blue dot in that area, but there are a lot of voters there.
Key.
But those voters in Asheville are, they're, the kind of voters who will figure out a way to vote. They're upscale, kind of liberal voters, and they're probably going to figure out a way to vote. I'm not sure a bunch of these folks who've had their homes and lives destroyed elsewhere in western North Carolina in the mountains there are going to be as easy to wrangle for the Trump campaign. Here's my question about North Carolina.
So, what he's basically saying is that the urban areas, the blue areas, they'll be fine in terms of voting. They'll get to the polls. But on the other hand, the people, the rural community folks, are far less likely to be able to vote. And it says here from Politico, Helene hit Trump's strongholds in Georgia and North Carolina. It could swing the election. Officials in both swing states face urgent decisions about helping people vote in shattered communities. Well, isn't that a very good incentive for the people currently in power who risk losing that power to be a little slower and a little less effective in helping those communities, if doing so might keep them in their seats? It says Hurricane Helene hit especially hard in heavily Republican areas of Georgia and North Carolina, a fact that could work to Donald Trump's disadvantage in the two swing states. Research has shown that major disasters can influence both voter turnout and voter preference, and Helene has pushed this contest into novel territory. It's the first catastrophic event in US history to hit two critical swing states within 6 weeks of a presidential election, based on the Politico's E&E News analysis of data compiled by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The challenge for Trump: the parts of western North Carolina and eastern Georgia that were flooded by the monster storm are largely Republican. In 2020, he won 61% of the vote in the North Carolina counties that were declared a disaster after Helene. He won 54% of the vote in Georgia's disaster counties. Both Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris this week visited Georgia, a state that President Joe Biden won by just 11,779 votes in 2020. Georgia and North Carolina each have 16 electoral votes, and polls show that Trump is leading Harris by about 1 percentage point in each state, well within the margin of error. There's going to be a lot of voting alterations, and it probably is going to affect turnout, said Auntie Jackson, director of the John Locke Foundation's Civitas Center for Public Integrity, a free market think tank in North Carolina. Now, both states face crucial decisions in the next few days about how to help people register and vote after massive flooding ripped away roads, shuttered towns, and dispersed residents. These include whether to extend next week's voter registration deadlines, grant more time for voters to cast absentee ballots, and set up new polling places in areas where floods destroyed roads. State records show that nearly 40,000 absentee ballots were mailed to voters in the 25 North Carolina counties that were declared a disaster following Helene. Fewer than 1,000 have been returned. So if 11,779 votes won Joe Biden, Georgia, and 39,000 absentee ballots are not returned, that's way more than enough to have overturned the election in that case. This is definitely a possibility that this will turn the election towards Kamala Harris. Assuming, of course, that they don't extend the deadlines and set up new polling stations, or that they're slow and ineffective in doing it, or that the relief efforts are slow and ineffective, and more people are displaced for longer, inconvenienced in a severe fashion for longer, or even lose their lives as a result of, governments just not giving them the help they need. So, is the government incentivized to allow these things to happen? Make up your own mind about that. But it does say here that in eastern Georgia's heavily Democratic Richmond County, 3 or 4 early voting sites appear to be undamaged. County Elections Chief W. Travis Doss Jr. said Friday. NOSA's staff have also reached out to all 43 Election Day sites to determine their status, but has not heard back from about 30 of them due to power and internet outages. Until we go out there to assess for power and whatnot, I'm not sure what the situation will be, Doss said. Right now, of course, our immediate concerns were absentee and voting registration, and then the next step is early voting, and then the next step is voting day. So, do you think they will prioritize restoring power and polling stations to Democrat areas? Just a question. Helene hit some predominantly Democratic communities hard too, adding to the uncertainty. In North Carolina, Buncombe County was affected in really bad ways, and that is a liberal bastion, said Chris Cooper, a political scientist at Western Carolina University. And Watauga is in really bad shape, also a blue-leaning county. Overall, Helene could dramatically change who is in the electorate, Cooper said. In a state like North Carolina, where margins matter, then every little tweak to the electorate could be the tweak that makes a difference, Cooper said. It's right on the razor's edge between red and blue. County elections offices in North Carolina, 5 of which remain closed Thursday, will assess damage to early voting sites and polling stations to determine which facilities won't be available. Also, could they declare some facilities not available despite the fact that they are salvageable or okay because they are politically inconvenient? So I'm not saying that they would do something like that. That might not be legal. I'm just wondering if it's physically possible. When the North Carolina legislature meets Wednesday, it could give counties money for emergency polling places and extend both the October 11 registration deadline and the election day deadline for mail-in ballots to be received. Also, if there's a lot more mail-in ballots, I think that the in-person turnout was very much favoring Republicans by a lot, and mail-in ballots favor Democrats by a lot. So if there's more mail-in ballots, that could also swing the election potentially. In Georgia, where Monday is the last day to register to vote, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said in a statement that physical infrastructure will be in place when early voting starts October 15. Counties having to relocate early voting locations must notify voters, but if there's no communication to a lot of these rural places, how will they notify the voters? It says here, such actions have had varied results according to studies that are gaining prominence as 6 states from Florida to Virginia deal with damage from Helene. Yes, sorry, I mixed this part. After past disasters, states have similarly extended deadlines for registering to vote and submitting absentee ballots, opened new polling places, and allowed displaced residents to vote by mail or fax. Republicans have at times opposed these efforts, including after the COVID pandemic, because mainly they made, requirements for identification less secure by the rights standards. I agree with them about that mostly. And they're saying here, now, but such actions have had varied results. You need to do everything possible to erect emergency polling places in generally the same places voters are used to voting, says Kevin Morris, a voting policy scholar at the Brennan Center for Justice. 2022 study by Morris found that voter turnout fell below historical averages in the heavily Republican Panhandle counties of Florida after Hurricane Michael demolished the area in October 2018. Although Florida made it easier to vote by absentee ballots, voters were confused by the state's moves to close and consolidate polling places. They weren't sure where to go on election day. If a voter's house is damaged or whatever else, and they realize suddenly their polling place has moved, then maybe that's the straw that makes it too much for them to vote, Morris told E&E News. A lot of the decreased turnout was attributed to the closure of polling places around the Panhandle. After Hurricane Florence hit North Carolina in September 2018, the state extended the registration deadline and let counties relocate voting sites. But in 2020, when the elections board relaxed absentee voting requirements amid the pandemic, GOP lawmakers said the board had overstepped its authority and later changed state election rules. One change ended a grace period that allowed mail-in ballots to be received 3 days after Election Day. There's definitely a layer of politics on top of any decision they make, given what happened after COVID, said Cooper, the Western Carolina professor. Other election year disasters do not appear to have directly affected the outcomes of previous presidential races. Hurricane Sandy struck uncontested states such as Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey in late October 2012, and then President Barack Obama won all three. Obama did arguably gain political benefits from his administration's handling of the storm, which drew praise at the time from Republican New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Hurricane Matthew in October 2016 hit only one contested state, Florida, and spread damage along the Atlantic coast, a mix of Democratic and Republican areas. But overall, research shows that disasters affect voter turnout. Well, I think that's enough. We can say that not just the disaster, but the administration's handling of it could potentially affect the elections. And if you're at all cynical about politics, then you might question the way that this particular hurricane was handled, especially given that you can find so much on social media, including things that were brought forward by people like Elon Musk about the government either not doing a good enough job helping people or barring private civilians from giving aid. And as far as I can tell, this could be politically motivated. This could affect the elections, although there might be backlash. People who feel as though they've been abandoned by the administration could be far more motivated to go out and vote than otherwise they might have been. This could backfire to some extent. I'm not sure if the backfire could be enough to overshadow the gains the administration might make from people being disrupted to this extent by the hurricane. Either way, I feel as though we have lost a certain veneer of civility and bipartisanship that used to exist in all Western countries. Today, you don't really see that anymore, and you have a very obvious bias and political divide that is not abandoned even in disasters. It used to be that disasters caused everybody to come together and say, put politics aside and everybody do what you can for the people affected. It used to be that the politicians put on a show for our benefit of, bipartisanship and sort of a moment of harmonious coexistence, of working together to deal with the disaster. I don't think it was real, but I think it was helpful. I think it sort of helped hold the community together and stop from fracturing into opposing groups, really opposing tribes, like almost enemies. And we lost that now. And now it also allows politicians to act in ways that they couldn't beforehand because there would have been public backlash. They can be far less subtle about jockeying for political advantage through policy, because being partisan in the extreme is normalized because you'll have your half of the population supporting you in it. And the other part of the population, they won't make as much of a fuss because you aren't crossing a line. They are expecting it. It's normalized now. I honestly think on the one hand, that's a terrible thing. We lost something precious there. On the other hand, I believe that to a certain extent that harmony could exist because people were unaware of just how badly the partisanship was on the left and how badly the betrayal was on the right. Like, you had rhinos just saying the words without meaning them, never following through, and really allowing Democrats to just follow through on their globalist agenda. And there was no real alternative. it didn't matter who you voted, you'd get the exact same policies. It's just a matter of how quickly the change was implemented between the left and the right. That's why people called conservatives, Democrats, going the speed limit. And now there really is an alternative. So if you don't agree with the government, if you feel as though the government is in the wrong, then at the very least you have someone to vote for. But at the same time, breaking away from the uniparty, breaking away from uniparty politics, has cost us the veneer of civility that we used to have. We have become far more polarized. It appears as though, at least in this day and age, the cost of having a political alternative is the division of the population into two warring tribes. And that's a heavy price. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I think globalist policies are so bad that it's still better to have the alternative than not, but it's still a heavy price to pay. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.